Thank you very much. Just last week, I held a press conference, and I thought that there would be no need in such a short period to speak again to the press. But things tend to move very quickly in Guyana, at least notionally, positions-wise, very slowly on the economy and in things that matter to people. But since that press conference, we have seen some very important positions taken by the government. And these positions, on the face of them, seem to advance national interests. But they are actually very, very dangerous positions for legacy, for the future of our country, and for our well-being. So we've seen Minister Trotman reporting about his trip to Norway. And the big success of that trip was them managing to maintain the $250 million that the PPP had negotiated with Norway, particularly the $80 million that was set aside for the Amila hydro power project. Now, clearly, that's not an achievement, but it is marketed as an achievement, and it is so dishonest because Trotman and his party, the AFC, when they were in opposition, sought to get not only the $80 million to be withdrawn by Norway or not disbursed by Norway, but the entire $250 million deal that we had with Norway, raising several objections. They had a campaign to prevent the resources coming into this country. So it's disingenuous to now come and argue that the success of his trip to Norway was to keep the $250 million that we had negotiated and the $80 million for the Amila project. He has not responded to any of the issues that I raised in my last press conference about the ineptitude of his ministry and the anti-national positions that they took when they submitted through the INDCs for the Paris Agreement several promises that could be inimical to the interests of the country. I spoke about the 2 million additional hectares of land that they want to bring under conservation, and I asked the question, where are they going to get the 2 million hectares from? If, as Trotman had claimed, we had given out all the lands already, second, would they take back land from foresters and from miners? Secondly, I spoke about the promise to do 100% renewable energy by 2025 when they have no plan to even do 1% of the renewable energy by 2025 now. Not 1%. And so how are they going to get up to 100% by 2025? And part of that promise includes protection of watershed in hydropower areas. If we are contemplating building hydropower, any hydropower in the future, how will we achieve this? How will we be able to proceed given that promise that they have made? globally and that the president has signed on to. He has not responded to any of those issues. We then heard him saying that they're moving to establish the EITI, the Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative. This is something that was part of our agreement with Norway. And we were on track to implement this in a manner that recognizes the realities of this country, because companies that are subjected to the EITI will increase their administrative costs. And it has to be done in a sensible manner, enhancing transparency in the sector, but without bringing costs, additional costs to poor producers like the small miners, etc. We don't know how it would evolve now that it is being established. They're proceeding to establish the EITI. But what bothers me a lot is a point that I made the last press conference I had, that they seem to have sold out the interests of Guyana to international bodies. They take directions from low-level embassy staff from some countries, and everything that is technical in nature, they have farmed out to others. So if you read further about the establishment of the EITI, they now are bringing in a World Bank consultant to establish a multi-stakeholders forum. Now, why do you need a World Bank consultant to do this? We had one that has never worked since this government took office, the multi-stakeholders forum that the president chaired, that oversaw the LCDS, the Low Carbon Development Strategy. They need to now bring in a consultant to put together a multi-stakeholders forum, a consultant from the World Bank. This is the extent to which we have descended. And I am worried that this ministry is being run either on autopilot because the minister does not understand the technical nature of the issues he's dealing with, and so he farms it out to foreign consultants who will have their own agenda, an agenda often that does not coincide with our national interests. We have seen this historically. So that's one. Secondly, we have seen an even more dangerous statement from the minister. He said that they're going to review the 17 years contract that the PPP had signed with ExxonMobil. Now, I am always concerned about when ministers get so involved with negotiations with oil companies. This is one of the reasons why the world wants the EITI. So there is some distance between politicians and negotiations of terms with companies, so that they cannot be, like particularly oil companies, so they cannot be accused of selling out national interests and taking money in the process for doing so. But Trotman has announced that they're reviewing a contract and they want better relations. They want to get closer to ExxonMobil than we were. Does this mean that they are going to give out more concessions to ExxonMobil? What does this review mean? Who is going to oversee this? Do we have international lawyers who have dealt with the large companies like ExxonMobil that have hundreds of lawyers on their side that are well versed in petroleum law, etc.? Do we have advisors that can advise us on best practices in contracts, etc. My fear is that the answer is no, that we have a mediocre minister who will pick up, will get some advice from a few people surrounding him, and we will enter into a negotiation with ExxonMobil with a view to getting closer to them, as he said. I don't know what that means. And then the country will face the consequences in the future. Let me make it clear that any bad agreement with ExxonMobil that harms our national interests, the People's Progressive Party will have to review once it gets back into power. We'll have to review it, because this would last us for generations into the future. And we cannot allow one minister who is unprepared and incompetent to sell out national interests and possibilities of billions of dollars in the future because they want to get closer to the oil company. I don't know what closer means, because he has not defined it, as I said before. We have noticed that particularly in this ministry again, when they were very, very critical of us putting ministers to oversee various things, that in the bill, the telecoms bill, they have something that they argued against in opposition. They have enhanced the role of the minister. And in the bill, the Wildlife Management and Conservation Bill, which was the Wildlife Import and Export Bill that was drafted under the PPP and tabled in the Parliament, they just changed the name, but put the minister now playing a central role in the import and export of wildlife. We thought that this would be done by an independent body. And you know of the opportunity. This is how it has been done in the past. Now, the opportunity is for corruption there, because the wildlife trade has seen various scandals over the years. And so the role now, Trotman will now be deciding who gets the license and who doesn't get the license for export of wildlife. When this was done, and they were very, very critical in the past that ministers should not be playing this sort of role, which we agreed with. So I am very fearful that this entire thing about the green economy and about management of our natural resources seem to be moving from one issue to another, and the only pattern from one crisis to another, and the only pattern that we are seeing is incompetence. The only pattern, the only common thing in addressing all of these issues is incompetence, pure incompetence. So that's the first issue that I wanted to deal with. The last time I came here, I spoke extensively about the president's statement that he wants the country to be run in a manner that is transparent and that his government must be accountable. And he has, in several interviews, stressed this. And I gave him about 8 or 9 things that he could start with to examine that will demonstrate that in just one short year that his government has probably been the worst in contemporary history in Guyana in terms of accountability and transparency. Been the worst in contemporary Guyanese history. But they have ignored totally all that we have said, all our calls for investigation into what is known by people in the public and in many circles to be corrupt acts involving billions of dollars. But let me give you an indication of how they are responding to, say, the fuel smuggling issue. So for fuel, we have established now, based on a court case, that there are some people who were close to APNU in the campaign who have set up companies based on the affidavit by Mr. Jackson that these companies tried to induce him to smuggle fuel, bring his vessel down. I've seen releases by one of the individuals who owned that company who said that they were involved in, or one of the businesses is the trading of fuel. Now, to do that, you have to have a license. This company doesn't have the requisite license. Yet, there is no investigation by the government into that. There's no investigation to the other group. We can give them the names of the individual. We have about 10 individuals who've been involved in the smuggling, if you have a proper inquiry launched by the government. So what do? They needed a public scapegoat, so they've suddenly canceled the license of the Chinese company. Now, you've seen former Prime Minister, former President Samuel Hines writing about this. He made a few points. That the minister said, first of all, that they could not have, the PPP erred in giving an export license to this Chinese company because they didn't have an exploration license for oil and gas. Where is the connection between the two? Absolutely none. The exploration for oil and gas is very separate from the activities of this company, which is a routine thing for many countries in the world. The United States of America imports fuel. It stores it, it re-exports. Many companies build storage capacity if they import at $10 a barrel or $30 a barrel, and then they store it and the price goes to $50 a barrel, then they re-export. They make money from doing that. It has nothing to do with us finding oil. This was long before we found oil and exporting oil. Nothing to do with that. Absolutely nothing. But one of the reasons for canceling this license was because they didn't have an exploration license, unconnected. Secondly, this company has made multi-billion dollars investment in building storage capacity. Our country has 24 days of storage. Guyana has about 14 days of storage. So if there is a problem, say we can't import oil into Guyana for 2 or 3 weeks, then we're in serious trouble. We run out of supplies. Countries try to encourage people to build more storage. In the United States of America, they have, apart from the storage facilities of companies, they have a strategic reserve. And if they release 4 million barrels per day from the strategic reserve, they can last 150 days without importation of fuel. They can ration it. We have 24 days of storage capacity. We should be encouraging people to invest and build more storage. And the Chinese can't fetch away the tanks when they build them here. They can't fetch them back to China. It's investments in our country. So they cancel that. They should be encouraging people to do this. Then they said the people built a little bigger wharf than they should. That was one of the reasons. That's from Bharrat. That has nothing to do with the cancellation. But let me tell you something. The real reason for the cancellation of this contract was to facilitate the smuggling. Because if for a year they frustrated those people, if the Chinese had started operations, then the people that they're going to buy the fuel under the table now, the market would have been, you have more competition in the market, the price will come down. If you more competition in the market means lower prices for consumers. So the only reason that they have done this, because this fuel smuggling runs so high in government that they have now canceled the Chinese because they are a competitor to the smuggled fuel. Not a competitor to Gaia because we need that. We need lower prices. And they're doing something that is good to build more storage capacity. Now, on one hand, there is an assault on Chinese investments. I saw reported in the Miami Herald, Associated Press, that Carl Grenier said, we're negotiating with the Brazilians to approach the Chinese government to look at the road and other infrastructure, power generation, etc., between Brazil and Guyana. This was only on the 25th of June, reported in Miami Herald. So on one hand, there is this big assault on the Chinese companies, I think because of some racism and corruption. They're ripping off the Chinese people here, asking them for money all the time. And then on the other hand, they're looking for money from the Chinese government to build the road from Brazil to Guyana and the other infrastructure. Now, we had the discussions with the Brazilians too. They're not saying that this was part of an MOU, but we have to ensure that the environmental concerns with that project, since they're talking about a green economy, that they're properly factored into the project. So on one hand, Greenwich talking about that, which I think Greenwich had a little bit more balance. He looks at both issues. And then on the other hand, you talk about this pure conservation approach, and then looking for money from the Chinese government, but on the other hand, chasing away all the Chinese investors. The Chinese ambassador now needs to say to this government, stop harassing the Chinese investors. Because if they need, I must point out that the Chinese and any investor, foreign investor, must comply with all of our laws. If they sign agreements, like Bai Shanlin and the others, they must comply with the agreement. If they don't comply, there must be penalties. But they must not be treated unfairly, because the only way we can develop Guyana is through local and foreign investment. And China is a huge source of investment now, not the United States of America, etc., because they have the resources. So this entire thing about fuel is unbelievable. It runs deep into the government about the fuel smuggling, but the president will not look into it. In light of the call for greater transparency too by the president and the Minister of Finance, we have asked for all the contracts to be released that were signed by the PPP that they said were corrupt. And so you would recall that they said with the FIP Motilal contract, that is the road to Mila Fall, that was a corrupt deal. This government now is in possession of the evaluation report when that project went to tender. Will they now release the evaluation report for the Mila Road to the media and to the public? I hope that you members of the media will call for the release of the evaluation report for the road to the Mila Fall, how they came up with the recommendation to recommend to Cabinet that Phip Motilal got the contract, in light of the need for greater transparency, and since they had claimed that this was a corrupt contract. We would like also to have the evaluation report for the hospital, the specialty hospital, since they claim that that was another corrupt contract, that when the tender went out, the bids were brought in and the evaluators did their recommendation. And for them to make public the evaluation report for the hospital too, since they were claiming that that was a corrupt arrangement. We'd like the evaluation report for the Marriott Hotel. When the bids came in there again, the evaluation was done, and there is an evaluation report. We'd like that report to be made public, in light of the fact that this government, which claimed that it was a corrupt deal, have now decided to expand the facility to put in the casino, because the casino has not been built. So we'd like the evaluation report done. And since they said that the new GPC that we were single sourcing now, they have available to them the pre-qualification evaluation, which went through a public process for companies supplying drugs, release the pre-qualification too, report, the evaluation report for that too. So I will, if this government is so transparent as it has claimed, and all of these contracts were corrupt, then it should have an interest, because the public and the media will now see that, oh, these are, look at what they did. They altered the evaluation to suit people, etc. They can make that judgment. So the only way they can do that is if they release the reports, and they have them now. Why they're not doing this? Apart from my call once again to publish the audits along with the response from people. So we've seen a lot of talk about transparency, a lot of talk about fighting corruption, but nothing. Now, I was pleased that the president went to City Hall. The last 2 times I went to City Hall, we gave them hundreds of millions of dollars from the central government. Listen to the City Hall. We didn't go over and give a lecture. We gave hundreds of millions of dollars from the City Hall to City Hall. But you had City Hall, as for the past 50 years, controlled by APNU. It's always been controlled by APNU. So the money was spent on other things, not on services to people, but it was spent on other things. But we pumped in hundreds of millions of dollars. Twice I went, and in both occasions, they got over $200 million and many other things. We also, you recall the Tulsi Prasad land that the government sold for, I think, 2.7 million Guyana dollars to Tulsi Prasad. This is the entire block of land on Water Street, opposite NBIC. And when we acquired it to put the vendors there, Tulsi Prasad went to court, and we ended up having from the central government to pay, I think, over $300 million to Tulsi Prasad for land that the government had sold, the APNU government, PNC at that time, for $2.7 million, or 3.7, somewhere at that. We ended up paying 100 times more nearly. And then we took that land from the central government and we handed it to the city council and said, here, you have a piece of land in a prime area, put in the vendors there. Our approach was different. We did things in reality. We didn't go just like the president and say, accommodate the vendors. He could have told City Hall this a long time ago. City Hall is controlled by APNU, and the government is controlled by APNU. He could have said, back off from the vendors. Clean up the place, but don't take away people's income. Could have said that to them. He could have said in his speech, this meter arrangement, I want it to stop. It's a corrupt act. It is a corrupt act. I want it to stop, not to get something What is the minister reviewing it for? What is he reviewing it for corrupt? How long does it take to review a contract like this? The premise of the contract is not one about contract details. It is about how the contract, how they got there in the first place. So that is pretty clear. There was no public tendering. There's no discussion at the council. The contract shouldn't have even been signed. So why are you talking about reviewing contract? You should say this contract was corruptly done and therefore we're going to block it. The minister has the powers to do that. And he could say to City Hall, I want to see your spending for the last year, since I've been president for the last year, and how much of the 800 million you spent, how many tenders, public tenders were done, and who got the contracts. And you will see, as I said before, people were handpicked and given contracts worth $30 million, $50 million, etc. No public tender. It is chaos and free for all at City Council. But I suspect, as I said the last time, that the people are doing this at City Hall because they're looking to the central government and saying, if you can do it in Durban Park, or not Durban Park? Yeah, Durban Park. If you can do that there, if you can do that with the fuel, the importation of fuel, give one man a single source, $420 million contract. If you can negotiate a $60 billion deal and not tell the public, that will cost the Treasury $60 billion through the whole DDL affair, when it's our turn to do the same thing too. No moral authority. And so all of this points to several directions. Now, I've heard the concessions that were routinely given out through Go Invest, and maybe you should check this, have been suspended. That Dominic Gaskin now is reviewing these things. Now, I had warned in Parliament that ministers, we sought to take ministers away from the administration of duty-free concessions. So Go Invest, a technical body, you will apply to it, they will make a recommendation to GRA, and then GRA will approve it. And it goes to the individual. Ministers don't have a role in it, except in rare circumstances when they had to sign these agreements. In this case now, suddenly we hear Dominic Gaskin is reviewing all concessions, and that people's concessions for duty-free are suspended, even existing companies. What is Dominic Gaskin's role in all of this review of concession? This is a politician. He shouldn't be doing it. It should be done by Go Invest or someone else. But the president himself says Dominic Gaskin is doing this. And we've just heard from him, don't expect any plan in the near future. It's going to take a long time. The LCDS, he said, not the LCDS, the National Development Strategy took a while to implement. We had a plan before that, though. The plan, we didn't wait on the National Development Strategy. When we got into office, we said there are 5 elements to the things we have to focus on. 1, macroeconomic stability, getting rid of the debt, cutting the fiscal deficit, bringing the balance of payment deficit into equilibrium, getting interest rates down because it was a disincentive to the private sector. It was 35%. Getting inflation down. That was the first. Secondly, improving infrastructure. Physical infrastructure, social infrastructure, and the architecture, that is legislative infrastructure for business development. That was a second thrust of the government. A strong focus on reorienting the budget, taking money from foreign affairs, the presidency, the army, and putting it into education and health. The first week the PPP got into office, these were the broad thrust of our policies. The fourth element was ensuring that the constitutional bodies, the rights of people were protected, Parliament, the Constitution, separation of powers, etc. We had clarity. We didn't wait for the National Development Strategy to be developed. That was an ongoing process. We had clarity about where we want to go. There is no clarity now. Absolutely no clarity where we're going. And this is a huge concern because we're drifting every single day, and it's not good for the country. You have seen, there are a couple of things that I am very concerned about. It is Felix's role. You know, I have publicly mentioned this, that why would you take a tiny department in a ministry and assign a minister to that department and then bring that minister under the office of the president? Why would you want to do this? And given the nature of the PNC from the past, which is being documented by international organizations and everyone, one of the mechanisms for cheating at elections in the past was control of the GRO and who got birth certificates, etc., so that they could vote at election time. Felix said we've imported some 300,000 forms in the budget debate. My fear, from what we've been hearing, is there is a project to give like 10,000 persons, because you never know. They could give them the birth certificates and then have them register. These are underage people to vote at the next elections. Produce fictitious birth certificates, have these people registered, because once they get the birth certificates, GCOM, the damage is done. GCOM will have to register them and then have them vote at the next elections. Now, we are looking into this matter. I want to call on GCOM to have a look at what is going on at GRO. I heard Felix has just recommended that an ex-soldier run the GRO. And so once that department is compromised, it's not only going to affect elections in the future, but it would affect the quality of our documentation, from passports to visas, etc. And this is why the international community has to pay attention to what is going on in that department. In fact, we are going to call for an audit of the department, but if it's well hidden. And so I want to urge anyone who is in there and has started to see the attempt to move staff around to be very vigilant. We will announce a number soon that people can call in information to this number, because we need to watch what's going on in that department. Maybe I'll just end there and open the floor for questions.
Thank you very much. The floor is now open. Who would like to go first? As usual, please identify yourself and your agency before you ask a question.
I'm Dr. K. You feel I can use just clarity. Mrs. Darky, yourself,
Yeah.
visited City Hall on 2 occasions, it was?
Yeah.
And we gave somebody, was this money given to the then Ministry of Local Government or the City Hall?
The City Hall.
You talk about reviewing any new arrangement, new agreements or this government signs with ExxonMobil. Instead of waiting until you get back into power, what avenues are available through the National Assembly for bringing the government into custody?
Well, this is something that we wish we had the cooperation of the government on, but they've been so delinquent, so reluctant to give information in the National Assembly. Just the information on the 71 persons who were released by the president, they're treating this as state secret. all of the agreements that they have signed and that were signed by us that they said they would table, they have not done that yet. So we will fight in the National Assembly to see what kind of agreement they sign or they plan on signing. But my fear is that the damage will already been done. If they sign on to the agreement, the National Assembly cannot change those agreements if they sign on to them. This is the oil and gas sector is a very important, will be an important sector in the future. It may not happen immediately because they think they can collect money tomorrow from these people. It's not going to happen in the short term or immediately. But it is absolutely important that we get the best agreement for the country, given that we are negotiating with a company that is massive by US standards. They have the best technical people in the world working for them. They pay them. And we have a duty to ensure that the contracts we sign, long before they're signed, that they are available to the public, they withstand scrutiny. The contracts we signed were consistent with the law at that time, the Petroleum Act. So if you plan to depart from those, then you need to tell us how you're departing. Not to say we want to get closer to these companies. What does closer mean? What does closer mean? And my fear is that neither the minister nor in the ministry do we have that. The government should hire the best lawyers in the world to ensure that we engage. Get some advisors who have dealt with this sector. Ask a country like Norway, etc., and the others to sit at the negotiating table with them when we deal with ExxonMobil, so that we get the best deal. We don't want to be vindictive, because when we see this as having to live with the consequences in the future too. A PPP government in the future will have to live with the consequences of bad agreements made now. And that is why we're interested in proper arrangements being made. That's why we're raising the DDL matter. Because when the court cases start coming and the courts rule in favor of people and award them a $50 billion settlement, say Banks DIH or someone else, who do you think will have to bear the burden in the future? Not just taxpayers. This may not happen next year or the following year, but could very well happen with a PPP government in office, and to have to meet liabilities of $50 billion. That's why we're interested in talking about them now, so that these bad agreements are not done. And by the way, we have seen the firing of some people from DDL. And the reasons given, from the GRA, sorry. And the reasons given by the chairman of the board are that there is a revenue shortfall, and secondly, that people don't, they have poor working conditions. So, but the main thing is revenue shortfall. So how do you fire the human resources, the manager of the human resources management division for revenue shortfall? And then the other person who is heading customs will retire in any case in August. He will retire in any case in August. So why fire him now? If there is a revenue shortfall, the chairman of the board should be fired. The chairman of the board, Raul Lucas, should be fired, and the head of GRA. Not the staff, the head of these agencies bear responsibility. And in fact, Raul Lucas should be fired for the agreement that they made that they're unwilling to talk about. You imagine you expose the revenue agencies to a $60 billion liability, and you're arguing that we had a shortfall of a couple $100 million and you should fire the staff. These are the ones to be fired. But it's quite strange too that I didn't want to talk about the third one, but that the two persons who fired are Indo-Guyanese too. It's quite strange. Are they responsible for the shortfall? It's quite strange. Raul Lucas should be going, not anyone else, as the chairman of the board. He made this is it. And so we are looking on to see what changes will be made there. I've heard they have already decided who the next Commissioner General would be 2 months ago. So all this whole process of selection and everything else is just a sham. And it's going to happen. But they're destroying the revenue agency. And the reason there is a shortfall in revenue is simple. The economy is not generating it. If you have slow turnover, you'll have less VAT collected. If people import less, you'll have less VAT and import duties collected. That is a simple thing. If you have a slowdown in economic activities, it's not rocket science. You get less revenue. This is what we've been talking about. We've been talking about for a long time. And so we're looking at the evolving situation there. Let's see how it goes.
Mr. Chairman, two questions. We've heard comments from City Hall about requests for possible bailout, and a PPP councillor has been unable, at City Hall, has been unable for months now to have motion table for a forensic audit at City Hall. That's my first question. The other one deals with, you mentioned government officials taking instructions from low-level diplomats, but we also see the UK High Commissioner calling for greater transparency from the government, yet we don't see response from government on that. And confidence in the Minister of Business. The President had said, well, he has full confidence in him, but we haven't seen any kind of foreign investments for since government took over.
Yeah. Well, the Minister of Business went to I think it's a GMA luncheon, GMSA luncheon, and he said, other countries are going through crises too. It's all external factors. Denial. And I don't want to spend time here doing that, but I can take that apart. And I will do so at some point in time. It's not what is happening in our neighboring countries. I've spoken about that. You can't use what's happening in neighboring countries. It's the ineptitude of this government, the lack of focus. If you tell people, we don't know where we're going as yet, you have to wait for over a year. How do you expect them to come and invest there? And if you're saying we're in the process of reviewing all concessions, they'd say, wait until you've reviewed them. It is these signals that they send that will cause no serious investor to put their money into Guyana, because they run the risk of losing it. City Hall, our councillors will continue to get a hard time to get the forensic audit because they know what the results would be. But the president loves forensic audit, and he can easily, if he wants to do it. And to be fair, he has been, once they've been completed, to be fair to him, he has said that that you have to find evidence to charge people. So he has done the audits, and he has made it clear we're not going to charge anyone unless there is evidence. And he recognizes that the so-called evidence has been scant. So he recognizes that. I want to be fair to him. But he could do a forensic audit in this this case to the City Hall. He could direct a forensic audit, and they can't refuse it. That's what he should be doing before any help is given to the City Council. And we can help, we can make suggestions about the terms of reference.
The last one on the UK.
The UK, listen, for me personally, I recognize that people who are accredited to Guyana, that they're here to serve their government and to improve relations between our country and theirs, and that they have to work with the government particularly to advance relations, bilateral relations. And that's perfectly normal. But even from opposition benches, I do not like, and this is a personal thing, when anybody lectures, particularly foreigners, lecture our people, including our government, although we are on opposite side. And that's why I'm saying to our people, have some pride. Say, we will listen to you, we'll listen to your concerns you raise, but at the end of the day, it is for our country to make the decisions that are in our national interest. We're not exclusionary, we're not becoming insular, we don't hate anyone, we're not xenophobic, etc. We listen to advice if given in a constructive manner, but at the end of the day, it's Guyanese who will have to determine their future in the world, because nobody looks out for interests except in Guyanese. And so that's why I don't like to comment too much on advice, whether it's good advice or bad advice. We listen many times to people, you know, they have views, etc. And we too have views on several matters.
First, just a clarification with regards to you said that you're aware of 10 persons who are involved in the smuggling. You're calling for an investigation. Just a clarification, are you calling for a criminal investigation, a police investigation, or and secondly, are you willing to provide those names to if there's a criminal investigation?
Yeah, well, they should have because it runs deep. My fear is that a criminal investigation would run into roadblocks because you have a lot of people involved who are in the executive, who are close to the leadership, that the president should launch an investigation.
The second question is of the issue you were raised. I'm trying to get from you the implications of this exit from the Union for the Caribbean, Guyana, particularly, and also if this presents an opportunity now, maybe some renegotiation with regards to the crisis that we here.
Well, that's a very important issue, and apart from a few comments that I've seen from the government, I've not seen a strong position that has the stamp of the entire government being released to the public. And I think it's such an important issue that they should have had a cabinet discussion on this matter to consider all the angles through which there will be a transmission to Guyana, if any, of the consequences of Brexit. And then inform our public about what to expect. And of course, having done that, it will also inform our national economic policy making, having considered all the consequences. But I'm not sure that the government has done that as yet. I don't know what they're waiting for, but I've seen one comment so far from Carl Greenidge saying that it may not have major consequences. I disagree. First of all, let us examine the consequences for the United Kingdom itself. So we have seen, since the exit vote succeeded, several short-term problems within the UK. We have seen the pound drop from 150, like the US dollars, to 130, one of the lowest ever in a long period. We have seen the FTSE, both 100 and the FTSE 250, losing significant value, market capitalization. We have, those are the two almost immediate consequences to the UK. We have seen that. Those are economic consequences. The markets have recovered slightly, but I guess that will be the major, or those two channels would be the major way through the stock exchange and the currency markets that the UK will be affected in the short term in the economic sense. In the political sense, because Scotland and Ireland both voted to remain in the European Union, Wales voted to leave. There is a fear that there'd be calls, in fact there are already calls in Scotland for a second referendum to exit the United Kingdom. You know, the last one was held and it was determined on a 45-55 percentage vote in favor of remaining in the UK. So, possibility of a second referendum, constitutional crisis in the UK. Ireland, there have been calls about once again for the reunification of Ireland and Northern Ireland. The Labour Party, you saw the turmoil in the Labour Party. 172 of their MPs voted in a no confidence vote against the leader to 40. The casualty has also gone to the Tory party. The leader has, the Prime Minister is going to resign, and he said, I'm going to go in a 3 months' time, and now there are calls for him to leave even earlier. So you've had political consequences, likely constitutional consequences, which could lead to the further fracturing of the British society, the United Kingdom, and you have had economic consequences in the short term, with turmoil in the market. In the medium term, most of the research houses are saying that the UK will face lower growth based on three reasons they're making their forecast for lower growth in the economy. So the economy will suffer, will produce weaker growth rates in the future. The first is that Britain will face higher tariffs in the European Union and other places around the world, so it will affect their trade. Secondly, lower immigration. So immigration adds to growth, to the growth, the spending, and all of that. And also the loss of confidence, the slowing down of foreign direct investment. So three things they're predicting will happen in the medium term. Less immigration, higher tariffs of British goods, and slowing down of foreign direct investments, that these could impact on growth. Now, having said all of that, there's still a whole deal of uncertainty because no one knows, once they trigger Article 50 of the European Treaty, what will happen, what kind of agreement they would have. And so these are the consequences for the UK economy so far that people have been speculating about. Now, for the European Union, there are also consequences. Europe has seen a populist wave sweeping it. It started before the decision to hold a referendum in the United Kingdom. I spoke about it in Senegal. I said, what will Europe look like in 2020 when we sign a successor agreement to the Lomé Agreement? Will they still have the liberal values that Europe is known for? How they're going to treat immigrants, etc. And so this decision here, the success of this decision, particularly if the short-term consequences, as we've already seen, the markets are rebounding, etc., are not so severe, it will give impetus to the extreme parties, the extremist parties, the populist parties in many other countries that have already started calling for their own referendum. And so the Netherlands, Denmark, France, etc., we've already seen calls for a similar type of referendum. Given the anti-migration or anti-migrant or the anti-immigration mood in many of these countries, there's a likelihood that this could succeed. And I was reading Mr. Haas, who heads the Council for Foreign Relations in the US, and he said that in the next 5 years, that many other European countries will leave the EU. That is the projection from the president of the American-based Council for Foreign Relations. So there is a fear that this could lead to the splintering of the European Union. Now, that is major, because if that happens, the entire EU project can unravel. And this is why there are so many concerns in the European Union about this. Now, Europe has dealt with us in this region through several facilities, through trading arrangements, and through the EDF and other special facilities. We argue the European Union is probably, for many countries in the ACP, the largest source of development funding anywhere for their national purposes, for national development. Now, with the UK out of Europe and the populist mood to do more for people in Europe, and particularly the countries that came in from the Eastern Bloc, the former states of the Soviet Union, there may be what could become a casualty is the new agreement that we will sign to succeed the Lomé Agreement. And that could mean a loss of tens of billions of dollars of development fund, because the United Kingdom, which comes from this Anglo-Saxon tradition, the Caribbean had all had mainly links, except in a few of the Dutch-speaking countries and a few French ones, but they're not even independent, have had relations mainly with the UK. And so the UK tends to champion a lot of their causes, or tended, in the European Union. And what happens in the future? how will this affect, and I think it will affect significantly the agreement that we will conclude in the future with Europe. And so that will affect us development funding. On the trade side, I think we will still have access to the European Union market because that will not change. We will now, but Europe will be, if this all goes through, the economy will be 17% smaller, the European Union. But will we now have access to the UK on a preferential basis? And can that become an opportunity for us for keeping access to the European Union and then having maybe a preferred access into to the UK that others do not have? Because like the EBA is a European-wide initiative, the Everything But Arms initiative that gives all the LDCs tariff-free access to the European markets. But if the UK exits the European Union, will they continue to extend that facility to all LDCs, or are they going to be negotiating a special arrangement with some of these countries? Now, some of our competition for sugar and stuff like that come from the other LDCs. So can we see this as an opportunity? It is too early to talk about it, but there are other consequences. So the Caribbean has to be careful. I'm sure almost that we're going to lose money from the development funding window of the European Union. The trade, the jury is still out in that regard. How about the rest of the world? This decision has caused turmoil in currency markets in some countries, because as people rush into safe haven currencies, like the yen and the dollar, it is affecting, they're pulling out money, particularly from the emerging economies. So Indonesia, Malaysia have seen that trend, their weakening of their currency. Once that happens, the debt denominated in US dollars will also become more expensive to service from those countries. So if you have US dollar denominated debt and the US dollar is stronger, then it becomes more burdensome to service that debt. You also have exports that are denominated in US dollars, because the strength of the US dollars, they become less competitive globally. So there are many, many ways that this could affect countries, and we have not even started. It's hard to do this at a press conference, go through this systematically. I'm just moving from issue to issue. But to go through it systematically, to see all the channels, and then to look at the advantages and the disadvantages. So yes, property prices will fall in the UK. It's cheaper for you to go as a tourist to the UK now because their pound is weak. It may enhance their exports a bit because the pound is weak. But on the other hand, you have turmoil in the markets and losers in other places. So the jury is still out on this. It's too early. We don't know what the nature of the agreement that will replace the single legal framework that spans all the European Union countries now. We don't know what will replace this in the negotiations and what Britain's trading regime will be in the future. And so what I'm saying is just all more speculative at this time, based on what we have seen in the markets. But we as policymakers in Guyana and in the Caribbean, we cannot not pay attention to it. Because if Europe falls apart, it has major consequences for global growth and for national well-being. Yes.
Thank you.
Anything?
Any other questions? No?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.